there was a very bad smell coming out of the back of this guy's van. So when they looked back there, it was his wife and his 4 kids. He had murdered them. The assumption is that he had murdered them. No? Yes. It happened. As ugly as all that is. Anyway, so he had murdered them. Hostage situation, somebody mentally ill. When they pulled him out of the wreckage and they started smelling the evil smell in the back of the van, and if you've never smelled a week-old dead body, then you don't have a clue how bad it really stinks. Well, I won't go into that part. This is the reason I can't stand mutton. Because I had to deal with this over and over and over and over again when I was in the military. Anyway, what were we talking about? Mutton, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about mutton. So you probably have a mutton for
But-
you.
Beef doesn't smell the same to you?
Beef doesn't smell the same as mutton? Doesn't come anywhere close to smelling the same as mutton. Mutton, I don't know. Mutton's a redder meat for one thing. It's also a sweeter meat. It has a sweet flavor, sweet odor.
So you just can't eat it because it smells like dead
It
bodies?
smells like dead human bodies. Not just dead bodies,
Don't say
but
that.
dead human bodies.
It's still
Some of us
delicious.
eat mutton, so don't say that.
I understand that. You can, and it probably doesn't bother you guys at all because you've never been around the things that I've been around. So
Yeah.
that's fine. And you guys can eat all the mutton you want. I mean, people have been eating mutton forever,
Mhm.
but not me. Not me. I've got to stay away from it. Anyway, okay, so what are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about the dead body. No, we're not talking about mutton. We're talking about
We're still talking about mutton. Let's
the
go
5
on.
dead bodies. So this guy had killed his wife and his kids. Sometimes in a hostage situation, if it's a long and drawn out hostage situation, the individual that is being held hostage falls in love or begins to have really strong feelings for their captors. And this is what happened to Patty Hearst. She became enamored with the people that seized her. They were using her for ransom. They were holding her for ransom. And of course, she became enamored with the whole cause and whatnot. And this is known as the Stockholm Syndrome. And the reason it's called the Stockholm Syndrome is because back in the 1960s, there was a hostage situation in Stockholm that lasted for over a week. In the end, they arrested the individuals that were holding the people hostage. And they couldn't get the female members, the female hostages, to testify against the other individuals. They said, no, they didn't bother us at all. They didn't really hold guns on us. They didn't threaten us. So they had a difficult time prosecuting them. And this is known as the Stockholm Syndrome. That's the reason it looks so silly. It's the reason I have that picture up there. I forgot. Successful negotiators, you have to negotiate the hostage situation. Otherwise, everybody gets killed, and that's not a good idea. The individual that is holding the other individual hostage is very likely to die unless they can talk the man down or the individual down. And of course, if he dies, the hostage is going to die. And nobody wants an innocent person to die. So we have developed what is known as a hostage negotiator. This is an individual that tries to get the individual that's holding the hostage, tries to get them to release the hostage, and tries to get them to stop the situation before somebody gets hurt. Successful negotiators make contact with hostage takers in a non-threatening a manner as possible, and then they maintain communication with these select individuals. I was just reading a book about this, and the hostage negotiators are doing a really bad job of keeping. I mean, these are police officers, and sometimes they get upset. Of course, they're angry a lot. But the negotiator, of course, is somebody that has to talk this person down, talk them off the ledge, as it were, which is not the easiest thing in the world. The negotiator isolates the hostage takers from any outside communication in order to foster the dependency on the negotiator. And at that stage, of course, sometimes they're able to get the individual to release the hostages so that nobody gets hurt. And then, of course, they can deal with the individual that has seized the hostages, do something with them. They can be as violent as they want after that. But of course, they're trying to keep from killing anybody or from injuring anybody. Some countries don't do this. Israel doesn't do this. In Israel, if somebody takes hostages, they break in and they kill them. And they're really good at it. But sometimes, of course, they kill the hostages at the same time, which is not something that you want to do. The Brits are not really very good at negotiating. The Brits have an organization called the SAS. These guys are trained to go into situations like that and to release the hostages if possible, or kill the hostages if they have to, because sometimes they'll use them as human shields. Anyway, some people don't negotiate very well. Some countries don't want to do that. We do in the United States. We want to reduce the amount of killing that takes place as much as possible. The negotiator then tries to reduce the hostage taker's fear and tension so that they will be more willing to agree to a reasonable solution. And the reasonable solution is, of course, releasing the hostages and the person giving themselves up. The major duties of police are divided into three general categories. Enforcing the law, arresting people, that only takes up about 10% of their time, most policemen's time. Maintaining order, such as directing traffic. These things, this type of activity takes up about 30% of the police activity. The vast majority of their time is taking up providing services for people, for individuals. Of course, on television, you never see this. On television, it's always a detective, and so he's a homicide detective. So all he's ever doing is dealing with murders. But most policemen are not homicide detectives. Most policemen are just out there trying to help everybody, trying to make sure everything that needs to take place takes place. My wife had a flat tire the other day. She couldn't unscrew the bolt that held her spare tire down, so she called the police, and the police came and they tried to do it and they couldn't do it either. So they had a pair of pliers and they finally they loosened the bolt with a pair of pliers. And that's what they did. They didn't change her tire, then they left. But they came over to loosen this bolt. My wife, of course, wants me to retire and go home so that I can loosen the bolt, so she doesn't have to call the police. We talked for 15 minutes about how I should be home loosening bolts so that she doesn't have to call the cops. Anyway, so 60%.
Spending too much time with Maria, so she's catching on.
I'll stay away from that guy. He's a troublemaker. So anyway, 60% of their time is spent as service personnel. In other words, trying to help people, which is not a bad thing if you think about it. If you think of the police, you probably think of the fact that they're racing behind you and with their lights flashing, trying to get you to stop. That's probably how you think of the police. But the reality is they're always there if you need them. If something happens, then you can call the police, and the police will figure out what is going to happen next. In a community of relatively old people, this kind of stuff happens all the time. Having to call the police to loosen a bolt so that you can change your tire. And that kind of stuff happens all the time. Enforcing the law, arresting suspects accounts for about 10% of police activity, as I said before. Directing traffic, about 30% of the time they direct traffic. Not everybody directs traffic in quite that memorable a way, but this guy does. Okay, and he's pretty good at it. It's his feet, watch his feet. Watch him see. Isn't that cool?
You must have earphones on.
I don't know. Providing services, helping stranded motorists, for example, accounts for most of police activity, about 60% of normal police activity. These are policemen in Singapore. As much fun as those things are. In the 1990s, special initiatives were taken to increase the time police commit to crime-fighting activities. We were kind of upset because they were doing all of these things for the community, but they weren't solving any crimes. So the federal government mandated that they should increase the amount of time that they spend trying to solve crimes. Putting more police officers in high crime areas and instructing them to arrest all lawbreakers, even for relatively minor offenses, have resulted in lowered crime rates. People are afraid that they're just going to be stopped for having a light out, and then they're going to check out my car, so I can't carry my pot in my car because they'll confiscate it if I speed, or if I have a broken tail light or something, or if my headlight is out. I've been stopped because my headlight was out. And then they told me, they didn't give me a ticket, they just gave me a warning. They said, you need to get this fixed. And I said, oh gee, I didn't realize my headlight was out. Usually I do. Your headlight was out, you don't realize it, right? Isn't that what happens? I know. And this is known as a zero tolerance policy, where they stop you and they can do anything that they want. They can check out your car, and they don't need a search warrant to stop to check your car, because you've committed an offense of one kind or another. And this is known as a zero tolerance policy. And it actually works. The problem is that it puts the police in danger. People don't like to be stopped, and they don't like to have their car inspected. Sometimes they have embarrassing things in there, things that they don't want people to see. And of course, the police are able to pick through just about everything that they want. Of course, if you're a criminal, then you don't want to be stopped anyway. And if they stop a criminal and they're going to inspect his car for something like crystal meth or whatever, and he has it in the trunk, he's more likely to become violent. And this gets kind of dangerous. So the zero tolerance policy has lowered the crime rate, as weird as that sounds. Officers reported an increased vulnerability to alcohol abuse and heightened levels of anxiety within the first 5 years of employment. This is the most dangerous time. They didn't realize how stressful their jobs were going to be. If they were working an 8-hour or a 10-hour or a 12-hour shift, they are in danger from the beginning of the shift to the end of the shift. And they're also in danger after the shift. As long as people know that they are police officers, there's always a possibility some yahoo is going to start taking pot shots at them or snipe them. Approximately 1% of officers reported having contemplated suicide. In 2010, there were 145 police suicides in the United States. This is a fairly constant figure, it's right around 150 suicides per year for law enforcement. Until this year, and it's worse this year, and I'll show you in a minute. Officers reported more physical, medical, and behavioral problems over their lifetime than the general population. You can imagine how stressful it is to be a police officer. One of the reasons that I told you that Dawn McDonald was a police detective, she changed her jobs, and the reason she did was because it was so stressful. She started losing her hair. She still does have her hair, I'm assuming, but she has this thick black hair, and it was starting to come out in patches, not when I saw her, of course, but she had to cut it short in order to, because if she grew it long, there were empty places, so she grew it short and combed it over and whatnot. Anyway, that was Dawn. because of the job that she had. So she went back to school and got a master's degree in social work and started working as a social worker. She was working at a hospice, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, that has to be stressful because all of your clients die. Yeah, not today, tomorrow afternoon is when they all die. So that was her job. So she was a counselor for people that were on their way out. According to the studies of police stress, the following three categories of stress are most commonly encountered by the police. Physical and psychological threats, being physically attacked is an example of that. Evaluation systems, negative press accounts for the police. In other words, and I was watching, I only saw the news for like 2 minutes last night, and they were jumping the police in Albuquerque. It's an Albuquerque channel. And that something was going on with the police in Albuquerque. Anyway, they were saying some really not very nice things about the police department down there, over there. Organizational problems and lack of support, bureaucratic hassles. You can imagine it's just as bad in police departments as it is here at an institution like this. We're always fighting with the administration. We're not being paid enough. We're not being given the support that we need. We get upset, and then when we get upset, they give us, a mug or one of those plastic coffee things. I don't know. They're always giving us things to drink coffee out of. I guess if we drink coffee, we won't be as stressed out, and we won't care that we're not making as much money as we probably should make. A lot of people we lost a third of our faculty last year because of the money that we're making. We lost 3 psychology professors last year. We've only got 2 left. It's hard. Anyway, so you're welcome.
So is that stress due to what?
Usually it's finances. This is not an easy place to live. It's easy for you guys because you're from here. But it's not easy for somebody from outside because how far do I have to go to get someplace where I can buy food?
Over the nose.
Or, yeah, that's not really the worst part. Where do I have to go for medical care? Not that I ever need it.
Aren't you allowed to go to IHS?
No.
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 Yeah.
Even if you have insurance, because I know that there's another faculty that goes to IHS and she's not native,
She's not native.
but she has her insurance.
They'll charge you insurance.
HMA.
Yeah,
I
so
have
they-
HMA. We all
get
have
their
HMA.
They get their insurance charged.
Oh, we were told we couldn't go to IHS.
Who told you?
We want to know, we
Oh.
want names. Just-
Right?
Who told you that?
They tell us
Start making
every
signs.
year because we have so many new faculty, they have to tell us. So every year they talk about not being able to go to IHS.
So you'll probably have to go to Flagstaff or Farmington.
Oh my God, that's so far away. I'd just go to Gallup. It's only an hour and 15 minutes down the road.
Actually, if we go over the hill, Farmington is much closer. Shiprock might be
It's
a little
not-
bit. Yeah, Shiprock might.
It's not
Yeah.
faster
Well, you know
though.
what, you have that private clinic in St. Michael's.
And then you have.
Yeah, there is.
How far is that?
St.
St.
Michael's
Michael's?
is about an
Just
hour's
down the
drive
road?
from here.
So I might as well go to Gallup. Gallup's about an hour down the road.
Well, actually, Gallup's further from here than St. Michael's.
Right, but I can zip all the way to. There's
Well,
no
you're gonna
So
zip
cost.
by the
what's
clinic
so
anyway.
hard about this?
What, an hour?
I mean, you're talking about all the stress and all the hard work you have to do just to get services.
It's just so far away. It's hard.
I guess it was the opposite for us because we grew up off the reservation, so my mom was like, if you guys join sports and you break a bone, you're just gonna have to ride it out. Because
Wow.
we didn't have insurance, so if we got really, really sick, she would have to drive us 7 hours back to the reservation to go to the clinic.
Oh my goodness. That's not right.
So, yeah, when
Oh,
I
she's
broke
just-
my ankle, that wasn't a good time. I
She's-
just had to lay in bed for 2 weeks.
She was trying to save money. Okay. Well, I'm not trying to save money. I just, if I have dental problems, I have to go all the way to, I'm not going to Farmington. I'm not going to go over them.
How long does it take you to go from here to Winter Rock?
I don't know, 45, 50 minutes.
45 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. then it's another 45 minutes to Gallup. In Window Rock area, St. Michael's, there is dental, there is medical,
For non-natives?
for non-natives, yes.
In Window Rock and,
And
St.
slash
Michael's?
St. Michael's area.
okay.
There is a clinic on top
Oh,
of the
no.
hill.
Gallup's only like 15 minutes from Window Rock.
Are
Speed
you
limit's,
flying?
speed limit's 70 miles an hour. I'm
The
65.
speed limit is 65.
65.
55 in areas.
Sure.
And in Depiana, it's going 100.
No. If it's 55, I'm going 65. If it's 65, I'm going 71. No, I'm going 71. I try not to ever pass anybody because it looks like I'm going fast because my car's only this far off the ground. So.
would love to have had one of those when I was younger.
So we have all these bureaucratic castles taking place. So but we also have bureaucratic castles taking place as far as the police are concerned. They don't want to pay them any more money. If they have to pay them more money, they don't want to pay overtime. So you can't be, you have to give your overtime to the police department. There's always a reason why people are pissed off about the police. They pay them too much money, that kind of thing. Everybody's trying to save money. It always comes down to money. Police work has unique dangers. You have to use force. Being physically attacked by select others. Confronting grisly crime scenes, of course. You get to see dead bodies and smell them, which is different. Blood has an odor to it. Yes, yeah, it does. Everybody knows that. Engaging in high-speed chases, of course, and those are all dangerous things to do. And of course, you can see the police here. This guy's got gloves on because he has to handle this individual who doesn't know this individual has some dread disease such as AIDS or syphilis or whatever. You never know. You never know what's going to happen next. So you always have to wear gloves. That's never fun. Look at this. This guy's got him by the neck. This guy's trying to cuff him. He's got one arm, but he doesn't have the second arm. Stressors of the system of police operate in ineffectiveness of the judicial system. They're always letting your people go. You need more evidence. You need better evidence. And of course, sometimes they're not able to keep the individual incarcerated. Court leniency with criminals. Sometimes they are convicted and they're still let go. Negative press accounts of the police, and of course the whole Black Lives Matter thing is really throwing a monkey wrench in recruiting police officers. Public rejection of the police. The police are like the Cossacks. They're like the Gestapo. People see them that way. They see them as negative rather than positive. They're supposed to be there protecting everybody. They're supposed to be there to serve, but of course the only time we think about them is when we see the flashing lights behind us when we're going 80 miles an hour or 55. Of course they get put downs and maltreatment of the police in the courts. They are treated poorly by select judges. They don't, of course, like that. In the United States, more police die due to suicide than to homicide, or in the line of duty, almost twice as many die by suicide, which is a shocking figure. We already saw the figure before. This is Daniel Beckwith. He's from Flagstaff. He committed suicide last year. There were 159 suicides among law enforcement officers in 2018. The number of suicides this year is up 24%. In 2019, it's up 24%. So it looks like we're going to have set a record for police suicides this year. And as you can see, that's an individual from Flagstaff that committed suicide. He was a police officer and he committed suicide. Gunshot wounds. That's how they kill themselves. They don't hang themselves, they don't poison themselves, they shoot themselves in the head. That's how police officers commit suicide. 2012, 126 police suicides. 2016, 108 police suicides. And you can see the figures From 2008 to 2011, it's somewhere in the 140 range, and that's the suicides around the United States. Organizational stressors include bureaucratic hassles, inadequate hassles by police administrators, weak support and confused feedback from supervisors, lack of clarity about job responsibilities. You don't know what you're supposed to be doing. When you do it, somebody tells you to do something, you do it, then you get in trouble for it. It happens all the time. Poor job performance from fellow officers. Ethics are sometimes a question. You're not making very much money. Sometimes they're taking bribes, they're taking kickbacks, and of course that's not right. That's unethical, but you know, you have to make ends meet, that's the way, and that's the only way that you can do it. Stressful working conditions also lead to burnout, a syndrome of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced personal accomplishment that can occur among individuals who work with people in some capacity. This is a definition from Maslock and Jackson, 1984. That's what burnout is. This is a joke. Okay, yeah. The police car's burning out, you see. Get it? He's patching on. Anyway. Jackson and Schuler in 1983 have hypothesized 4 organizational qualities that increase employee burnout. The first is a lack of rewards, especially positive feedback. If you do your job, you know, that's... I used to work, when I was in the military, I worked in SAC, and SAC used to say perfection is normal behavior. That's normal. That's what you have to do in order to work for SAC. SAC was Strategic Air Command. We were the ones that were in charge of all the nuclear weapons. And the idea was that if you're not perfect, so everybody dies. So you've got to be perfect. And of course, so nobody got any awards or rewards from SAC, because if you were perfect, then something bad happened. And then everybody got in trouble. So lack of rewards, lack of control over job demands. You've got somebody telling you what to do. It's like the military. There's always somebody above you telling you exactly what you have to do. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it doesn't really make any difference. You still have to do it. So you don't have any control over yourself. It's kind of like being a private in the Army. You have no control over anything, including yourself. Lack of clear job expectations. How do you know if you did something right? If I didn't stumble and mumble around, then I feel like I did it. I was okay with my lecture. However, if I were a police officer, how do I know what's good and what's not good? How do I go home at night and tell myself I did the best damn job I could possibly do? Because I did what I was supposed to do, and now somebody's screaming at me because their little boy got arrested for doing drugs. They're blaming me because he was doing drugs and I arrested him. What they wanted was for me not to arrest him and for him to get off and let him do his drugs. That's what they wanted. Now everybody's yelling at me. So you're damned if you do and damned if you don't if you're a cop. Lack of support from supervisors, of course, because they're in the same situation you are, except they've got higher-ups that are yelling at them. Repercussions of burnout affects your behavior at home. This is one of the reasons why divorce is very, very common among police officers. The average number of marriages that police officers have is 3. They're on their 3rd marriage. This is usually people in their 30s. Of course, by my 30s, I was on my 3rd marriage too, but then again, I was in the military, and the military does exactly the same thing to you. The problem with police officers, of course, they take their jobs home with them. They're upset when they get home. They're angry. They're tense. They're anxious. And so what do? They potentially drink their problems away. And of course, that's never good for a marriage situation. High rates of substance abuse, domestic battering, and divorce are regarded as occupational hazards of police work. A lot of times these individuals will kind of give up and they will marry somebody. They'll either marry another police officer or they will marry somebody that they've arrested. I know, it gets really weird. These people, a lot of times they marry prostitutes because they're around them all the time, and of course, anyway, they marry prostitutes. And of course, that rarely works out because there's all these memories of what this individual has done, and that's the reason that they've been married and divorced so many times, because they keep marrying the same person, which is normally what we do anyway, isn't it? Don't we keep marrying the wrong person over and over again? Not the same person, but the same type person. We're attracted to a select individual. I was talking to Jeremiah about this, or he was talking to me about it. I thought that was kind of interesting. Yes, we do. We tend to be attracted to a select type of individual. That individual isn't a marriageable, they don't have a marriageable personality, and of course, then you end up divorcing them and marrying somebody else, just like them. Oh, we keep making the same stupid mistakes. Our picker's broken.
Busted.
So you gotta fix your picker. Possible strategies for decreasing burnout, create opportunities for citizens to express their appreciation of what police officers are doing daily. Officers can be given greater flexibility in how they respond to work demands. As long as it's not illegal, go ahead and let them do it. But of course, you have to remember that the police department, a lot of police departments have individuals who were in the military. So discipline is really important to them. Standing at attention seems silly to me if you're a police officer and not in the military. The only people that should be standing at attention are military personnel, not police officers. But, of course, most of these individuals were in the military, so they don't mind it. And that discipline is very necessary. So when you're in a situation like that, you don't train your individuals to respond on their own. Normally, they have to call things in, and they have to get advisement from higher ups. Use team policing, a partial shift of decision-making from a centralized authority to frontline officers and their immediate supervisors. That's probably the best way to do things. Participate in stress management programs, of course, is another way to deal with it. Police officers are often reluctant to go to counseling for several reasons. Diminished respect from fellow officers. Oh, you're that wimpy that you need counseling? Or you're just embarrassed. To overcome this, police departments have developed alternatives for providing counseling. For example, peer counseling, provide counseling targeted at problems specific to police officers, such as the use of deadly force. And that always comes up. If somebody has never killed anybody, and I hope nobody's ever killed anybody, but that's not the way it works. Sometimes these individuals have to use deadly force, and this is really tough for them. Well, I'm not going to go into that, but it's not the easiest thing in the world. Doing these kinds of things, they have to take the person off duty if they've ever shot somebody in the line of duty. And then sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes they never come back. Sometimes they just can't handle it. Police counseling services are usually offered in one of two ways. It's either done in-house or it's done by an outside psychologist. While in-house professionals are more readily available and more knowledgeable about police issues, an outside consultant may be better able to protect the confidentiality of their clients' disclosures. And of course, this is all quite expensive if you think about it. So they don't want to, the administrations do not want to have to pay for this because it's too expensive. And of course, the police officers would like more money. But there is no more money because they're paying all these counselors to work with them. And sometimes, of course, they're trying to pay as little as possible. Police performance is constantly being reviewed by the courts and evaluated by the public. Several amendments to the U.S. Constitution impose limits on law enforcement officers. For example, the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable search and seizure of persons or property. And of course, this is a problem. So if I'm a police officer and I stop somebody for speeding, do I have a right to go into their trunk and see what they've got in their trunk? Well, theoretically, no, but in this state, you can. In this state, if they, yeah, we're in Arizona. In this state, if they stop you for speeding, they can do anything they want. They can inspect your trunk, they can't tear your car apart, but they can reach underneath your seat. They can't take your seats out, but they can reach underneath your seat. In this state. New Mexico just passed a law yesterday that they're going to give free tuition the first 4 years of education for residents, of course, of New Mexico. Free tuition. Free tuition. So if you, I don't know if, and I read the article that didn't say anything about the Navajo reservation, so I'm not exactly sure if that includes the Navajo that live in Window Rock.
I think it only includes Shiprock and Crown Point campuses.
Well, I'm sure it doesn't include the entire reservation. They don't want to pay for Arizona Navajos, certainly, or Utah Navajos. But I wasn't sure that it covered even New Mexico Navajos. I wasn't sure, but I don't know. They haven't really passed the law yet.
Yeah, last year the administration here was meeting with the honchos over there in Farmington, and they're the ones that discussed that. Shiprock campus and Crown Point campus got money from that.
So is everybody going to move to New Mexico?
I think that's the move in mind.
Then you can go to UNM for free,
Right.
or Montana, or New Mexico State. During the last 35 years, citizens groups have become increasingly critical of the police. Two types of concerns: the manner in which the police perform certain duties, such as arrests and interrogations, and the prevalence of police brutality. And of course, police are kind of brutal. From time to time, they tend to be relatively large individuals, and sometimes they do things that they probably shouldn't have done. One innovation during the last 35 years is community-based policing. Police officers develop a proactive problem-solving approach with active collaboration from local citizens who support the police in the effort to combat crime, promote safety, and enhance the overall quality of neighborhoods. So the community-based policing is a new idea. It started in Chicago because they were having so much trouble in Chicago. You may remember the 2016 election. Trump just jumped all over Chicago as the murder capital of the United States, which wasn't even true in 2016, wasn't true in 2015. They do have a lot of murders in Chicago, but Baltimore had more murders, Flint, Michigan had more murders, Dayton, Ohio had more murders. Chicago was like 27th in the nation or something, but he just jumped all over Chicago because Chicago always votes Democrat. Chicago's version of community policing, so Chicago started this community policing idea a long time ago, well, not a long time ago, about 20 years ago. And it has waxed and waned over the years, but now they're back into this mode where they have police officers walking the streets and getting always being assigned to a select neighborhood so that people will get to know who they are and they know the people in the neighborhood. So the Chicago version is neighborhood orientation. Police officers develop a partnership with community organizations for fighting crime. The police officers will be given a beat so that there is a geographic area that they have to cover. A structured response to calls for police service, emergency calls handled by a special team. A proactive, problem-oriented approach. More effort is devoted to crime prevention, brokering more community resources for crime prevention and analysis of crime problems. I was watching an old movie the other night. It was a movie made in the 1930s, and somebody murdered somebody, and Barbara Stanwyck came running out, and she went to a police call box. And at that time, in Los Angeles and New York and Chicago, they had call boxes So if something happened, not everybody had a telephone back then. It's not like today where everybody makes movies with their cell phones. Back then, of course, everything was connected, had to be connected with wires. So she went out to a police call box, which was down the block from where the murder took place. She opened the call box and she made a call to the police. Of course, now they probably would have vandalized that call box and yanked the telephone out. But she was lucky, she found one that hadn't been vandalized yet. Anyway, that's the way they used to do it. Back in the 30s, they had call boxes. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 58% of all departments used full-time community policing officers. Some with community policing report large improvements in the public's attitude toward their police departments and sizable reduction in rates of serious crimes. And this is because there's always a police officer somewhere in the area, and you never know where this guy is. So if you're a criminal, you need to understand that it's not going to take an hour for them to respond to you breaking in someplace. That's what happened in Dayton. The guy opened fire, and within a minute, the police were there. And that's because the bar that he chose to shoot up, there was a police detachment that was stationed just down the street. It was less than a block away. And so they came in and started engaging him, and eventually, of course, they killed him. But he only shot for 32 seconds and killed 9 people and wounded 27. But we already know that. Community policing has been associated with greater self-protection efforts, lower fear of crime, and stronger feelings of attachment to the community. These individuals get to know the people in the community. If they see somebody that doesn't belong, if they see somebody that doesn't seem to belong there, then potentially they can ask them what they're doing there. And actually what they do is they'll ask them if they can help them. You seem lost. Is there anything I can do for you? Actually, I said that to a guy yesterday. He probably thought I was about to arrest him or something. Call the cops on him. In general, police administrators endorse community policing. This is weird, because this guy's walking down the hall, and he's talking. And he's the only one in the hallway. And he's talking like he's talking to somebody. Didn't have his phone up to his ear. He had one of those things hanging out of his ear. He was actually talking on the telephone, but his telephone was in his pocket. And he was talking off of this thing. I don't know. Anyway, it was weird. It was like, if you've ever been around people that are schizophrenic, they talk to themselves. That's what it looked like. He had his hands in his pocket like this, and he's walking down the hallway having this lucid conversation with somebody. And I had no way of knowing that he wasn't insane. Because the thing was on the other side. Whatever this thing was on the other side. It wasn't on both sides. It was just on, and it was hanging out of his ear. He was talking on the telephone. So I asked him, of course, if he was okay, if there was anything I could do to help. and he ignored me because he's talking on the telephone. Anyway, he fooled me. I didn't have any clue what was going on. Look, it's Spider-Man. Well, anyway. In general, police administrators endorse community policing and believe that its advantages, improved physical environment, more positive attitudes toward police, fewer citizen complaints, outweigh its disadvantages. And there are disadvantages to the community policing program. Displacement of crime to a non-community policing area. In other words, they tend not to break into these communities, but it forces the criminals to go someplace else. So you're kind of herding the criminals into places where there are no cops. More opportunities for police officer corruption because they know everybody and they're more likely to take bribes. Resistance from rank and file officers, of course, because they have to walk now before they could drive. They could ride around, but now, of course, they have to walk around and be seen. And that's what they want. They want them to be seen. They want them people to know that they're in the area and that they're available to people. If they're riding around in the cars, not quite the same impact. Because if they're riding around in their cars, they're isolated by bulletproof glass. I mean, all the windows in police cruisers tend to be bulletproof. So they can't really hear anything. They can't really talk to people. If they do talk to people, they're talking to them from a position of strength. Because they're sitting in a car, in an armored car in essence. Anyway, there you go. Well, not worry about that. Okay.
What chapter is this in?
I'm sorry?
What chapter is this in?
That was chapter 4. This is chapter 5. Eyewitness and crimes to crimes and accidents. You're right. Ooh. So now we're on chapter 5. Today's Thursday. Oh, wait a minute. Tuesday. Those of you who are thinking maybe you want to be a counselor, there is a counselor that is coming to the campus. He was brought in by Avery Denny. Okay, his name is Lorenzo Jim. He's going to speak on integrative healing, integrating Western and Navajo healing. He works at the First Nations Mental Health Clinic in Albuquerque with Avery, by the way. Avery is one of the healers that goes over there. The interesting thing is that this is Albuquerque, so it's not just Navajos. There's also 3 other types of healers. So he has a integrative, intertribal approach to healing. So it's not just Western, it's not just Navajo, but it's also it's just indigenous healing. There are 4 of them that work with Mr. Jim. So he's going to talk about integrative healing. This is on the 24th of September on the 4th floor, theoretically, between 5:30 and 7 o'clock. So if you're interested in counseling, then it wouldn't be a bad idea to be there and see what Mr. Jim has to say. And he's a friend of Avery's. He said, Avery's kind of a funny guy. Tells jokes. I asked him if Lorenzo Jim told jokes, and he said, no, he's very serious. So I underlined serious. There we go, yeah, serious. Anyway, so he's the director of the First Nations Mental Health Clinic in Albuquerque. And I asked them, well, why in the world did they name it First Nations? That's a Canadian thing. And he didn't have an answer for me. He said I'd have to ask Mr. Jim when he got here. So we'll see why he named it the First Nations Project.
Is our test due this Sunday in Site 325?
No, I'm not requiring anybody to be there. I thought maybe you'd want to go. They said that I should give you some kind of credit for it. This is Dr. Worm was up there. They said, my students want to be counselors. Why the hell do they need credit to go to something? I think I even used the word hell. So.
I mean, our tests on 325, our upcoming test, when is that due? Is it due this Sunday?
Not really. You can do it any time. I just want you to do it
Oh,
sometime. I don't have, Harley hasn't done jack all semester. And that's okay.
so we don't need to submit our research papers to you?
Your research papers are due in November. And but you can turn them in anytime you want. If it's real bad, I'll turn it back to you and you can rewrite it. That's usually the way it works. I'm sure you'll get your stuff done now. I never doubted that you're going to get your stuff done. Yeah, I don't take off for any points for late work. You know that. You've been in my classes before. I never take off for late work. Just turn it in whenever you get it done. I just,
You're pretty much like the silver lining and the saving grace to Dr. Alming's deadlines and everything else.
Yeah, I apologize. She's kind of that way, isn't she? You have to get things done on
Yeah, but
time.
you give us the opportunity to pace ourselves. Like me, I'm in and out with the respiratory and all this other stuff. And there's times that I just cannot get to my computer from my bed.
I
It's
argue,
like 3 feet away.
I argue this point with everybody. Everybody wants you guys to turn things in on time. Like, everybody runs by the clock.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the normal human way. If we were born with clocks on our arms or something.
It's the normal Western way.
Well, that's what,
It's a normal Western way. So, maybe I'm not Western.
I'm just trying to graduate before you leave.
Well, good luck with that.
I just want to graduate.
Otherwise, I will transfer.
If anybody needs a class next semester, we're signing up for the classes we want to teach next semester. Make sure that,
Is
one
that
of my
drug
people.
and alcohol abuse? I need to take one of those. 360.
Yeah, drug and alcohol use is one of the classes I'm teaching, 360. I'm teaching 360, 350 again, because somebody needs it in Cuba City. 315 is health psychology.
Can you do ITV on the 360? You know, that's, I don't understand how they can get a lot of these classes. through
On ITV, the problem with ITV is that public health takes all the slots, so we don't have any slots. It's kind of first
Why
come,
is that?
first served.
Why is
Who do people like, you know, it's that kind of thing, nobody likes us. So we can't get any slots. Miranda tends to be able to get slots. Public health gets up whatever they want, which leaves us, SOL, with L being one.
So, I guess
So we can't teach we can't teach ITV.
are you
ITV only.
graduating more students in public health versus psychology?
No,
Is that why?
no. We're graduating more students. We're number one.
It's like, well, why can't these services
It's
be
not the way it
provided
works.
so that we can graduate?
It's all political. It's all
The
political.
deans, I think,
Who's
has the
the
final
dean?
say in everything.
It's right there. It's right on the other side of this wall.
It seems like the closer we're getting to graduation, the more stressful it becomes because of the limited services that are being.
Well, we're trying to teach all of our classes online. Only the
Well-
psychology class.
will drug and alcohol be online?
Yeah.
Also, that'll be online. Okay.
Yeah, what I've done is I've created a type of class called dual modality, where I teach it both in the classroom and online.
So it's kind of like this one.
It's like this one, exactly, yeah. There's 325 classes.
So hypothetically speaking, if there's a class that I need and it's like my senior year and nobody's teaching it that semester, could I do an independent study
Yes.
with the instructor?
Yes, so what is this class? Or
It's
is this
hypothetical.
Okay. Yes,
Okay.
as long as I'm still.
You're
Bruce,
not planning on leaving, are
You
you?
think,
promise me, just kidding.
you think I'm kidding? I mean,
I'm gonna have to talk to your wife and be like, look, we need
You can
to.
talk to my wife if you want. I tried to talk to her. Doesn't do
This is
anything.
my future.
We're gonna have to all go live on the farm with him and his wife because we can't graduate.
Well, this is what happened. Yesterday, my daughter turned 50.
Uh-huh.
50?
50. My daughter turned 50.
How old are you?
She didn't get out of bed. My people live into their hundreds. She's only halfway through. What the hell's she worried about?
Mine's 52, and she's always complaining.
Well, I don't know. I'm 70.
70?
Yeah.
You don't look it.
Well, thank you.
You don't.
I'll
I
put them.
thought you were,
I thought you were your
69, I know.
60s, yeah.
and what year did you serve in Vietnam, right?
71.
71?
71, 72.
So what was your MOS?
Oh, I wasn't in the Army, I was in the Air Force.
Oh,
MOS is Army. I was a lab tech. I was a medic.
Not Army.
I was an Air Force. So we got to fly around in helicopters,
I have a question.
make sure people didn't die before we got back to the hospital.
When you went to college and you did like your research papers and stuff, do you think that it was easier back then to go to school than it is now, or is it the same?
When I
Because
would-
with all the technology available now.
When I went to college, I think I wrote 2 research papers the entire time I was in college. Of course, I was an English major when I was an undergraduate. They didn't have the same accreditation that they have today. Was it easier back then? No, because we had to learn Latin, we had to learn Greek, we had to take 2 science classes instead of 1. What else did we do? What other horrible things did we have to do?
Type your paper. Use a typewriter, white house.
Oh, yeah, everything was a typewriter because the computers were the size of that, well, that
The
desk.
big old machine, you know.
Oh, they were huge, and they punched out cards rather than gave you any information. So it's not like you could Google, you know,
Mhm.
Google didn't exist back then. So if you wanted to find something out, you had to go to the library and look it up in the encyclopedia. Was it easier back then? No, I would say it's easier now. Because you've got all the information you want right at your fingertips. The database for, at this institution, you can look up anything in APA and find anything that you want. In the old days, you had to go to these green books. And you had to know what year it was printed because each one represented a year, all the magazines that were printed in that year. And if you wanted to find, you know, schizophrenia, you had to know that it was printed in 1965 and go back to the 1965 book and look up schizophrenia, and then you had to find it by the author. And you guys can just do this by typing.
You know, I wish that they could teach a class in APA formats, reading literature. I mean, I'm sure we took that in English 1, but
English 1 teaches
really
you,
focusing on APA for the psychology students
that's what we have been trying to get the English department to do.
versus one of the Navajo classes.
I think that the Microsoft actually has a format that has the APA. It's
Sometimes it's not-
edition 6, not the edition 7 though.
Oh, there is no 7 yet.
Yeah.
7 hasn't come out
It's the
yet.
6th edition.
We're still on 6. But sometimes it's edition 5.
Here and there.
Yeah.
And it would help students to take a class, you know, to
Yeah,
APA
well,
or MLA, and how to do literature reviews. Those are things that we,
You need to go and complain to the English department because they don't listen to me anymore. They see me coming and they go the other direction. They don't want to talk to me anymore. Because I tell them, you need to teach APA. I mean, half the institution is using the APA.
I recall when I was in English class, all we were told is go to the site, and that's how you should be formatting your research and articles in APA. That was it. No other information.
They teach MLA. The only people that use MLA are
It's a business.
the English, no, the business uses APA.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Everybody uses APA. I think just the English department, because they're the ones that publish their stuff.
Only the English people use, only the English department. English literature and grammar uses a MLA, even though it's a thick.
Is that really any difference?
I'm sorry?
I said, why not implement it in high school?
What, the APA? Teaching people how to use APA?
That's what my kids are learning in high school.
Because English teachers don't know how to use APA. They only know
Because
how to
they're
use
using
MLA,
MLA?
because that's what they've been taught. So this is this cascading problem with them teaching you something that you don't need, that you will never use again. They claim that if you know MLA, then it's really easy to adjust to APA. That's not true at
That makes
all.
the other one now.
Anyway. Oh golly, all this is on tape. My wife will probably watch this and divorce me.
Then
Again. Then I can teach.
Maybe your fourth
Then you
one
can
will
stay.
work out. It always takes 4.
You've seen how green it is back in Iowa.
So how's the cat's blown out leg?
I talked to my wife last night. She said, the cat just got off my leg and left a bloody spot. So it blew out again. I know. She said it's smaller though. It's leaving fewer and fewer bloody spots. Or smaller bloody spots.
It just sounded weird in the context.
It was the conversation in our other class when his wife was having an interesting day.
Well, see, my daughter won't talk to me because, I don't know. There's got to be reasons. So I called her last night on her 50th birthday. She wouldn't talk to me last night. She didn't answer the phone. Stayed in bed all day. Calvin C. Johnson Jr., a college graduate with a job working for Delta Airlines in Atlanta, was convicted of rape on eyewitness testimony. In his defense, Johnson's hair did not match a pubic hair found at the scene, and 4 witnesses that gave Johnson an alibi for a time of the crime. They convicted him anyway. He had an alibi, and his pubic hair, or his hair didn't match the pubic hair, which doesn't make any sense, does it? The eyewitness had implicated Johnson from a photographic lineup, even though she failed to pick him out of a live lineup. She recognized his picture, but she didn't recognize him. At trial, she claimed that she chose someone else in the live lineup because she couldn't stand to look at Johnson, so she picked somebody else. DNA proved that Johnson was innocent. They finally let him out of jail, despite the fact he had an alibi and an eyewitness was not really able to identify him. Cornelius Dupree was accused of robbing a couple and then raping the woman in 1979. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison. At 2 junctures during his incarceration, he was offered parole if he admitted his crime. And the police will do this all the time. The courts will do this all the time. He refused parole. He refused to be released from prison. In 2009, after 30 years in prison, Dupree was exonerated through DNA evidence of the crime. When asked why he didn't take the parole, Dupree said, "Whatever the truth is, you have to stick with it." So he was willing, just because he hadn't done it, he wouldn't admit that he did something he didn't do. So he stayed in jail for 30 years, which is not the best place in the world. But he was finally exonerated. Approximately 75,000 defendants are implicated by eyewitnesses in the United States every year, but unfortunately, some eyewitnesses make mistakes. DNA testing sometimes reveals that the person convicted of a crime was not the actual perpetrator. Recent estimate, 80% of exonerations for rapes and robberies involve mistaken eyewitness identifications. If you've never seen somebody before, how in the world can you identify them in a lineup or by their picture? That's the question. One reason why mistakes are so common is that when eyewitnesses make an identification, police often stop investigating other leads and instead look for further evidence that implicates the chosen suspect. This is an example of confirmation bias, whereby people look for, interpret, and create information that verifies an existing belief. Confirmation bias. And this is the reason that we find so many eyewitnesses, or eyewitnesses are so inaccurate, unfortunately. It's confirmation bias. Only 27 states have laws that compensate the wrongly imprisoned. Financial compensation is generally small, and social service assistance is rare. Unfortunately, many exonerees leave prison with next to nothing. And of course, this is a picture of the mayor of New York being arrested. This is Bill de Blasio. He was running for president. I think he's not anymore. But they arrested him for something. He didn't commit that serious a crime. He's really tall, as you can see. He's like 6'9". Mistakes in the process of identification can occur the moment the crime is committed. Situational conditions, for example, darkness, can diminish memory strength. You don't remember what happened at night as well as you remember what happened during the day. Sometimes during the night you think you see something and it actually isn't there. What color is a car? How can you identify the color of a car at night? A car that's dark, a car that's gray will look black, a car that's green or blue looks black. Well, if it's a yellow car, you'll probably figure it out that it's yellow. Or white, if it's white, you can identify a white car, but maybe it was a silver car. Okay, so you get things wrong in the dark. Mistakes can also occur during the investigation. Police often ask eyewitnesses to examine a series of photos, and this is known as a photo spread, or a physical lineup of suspects. Eyewitnesses may feel implicit pressure to identify someone and are likely to assume that the perpetrator is in the lineup. And of course, if we look at these individuals, if you saw the person that committed the crime, would you be able to pick them out of all of these faces that look relatively similar? Did he have a beard? What was the shape of his head? How much hair did he have on top of his head? Questions like that. Although accurate identifications are more likely than inaccurate identifications, we know that innocent people are sometimes selected and guilty people are sometimes overlooked. A lot of people think that all black people look alike. A lot of people think that all Indians look alike. A lot of people think that all Asians look alike. I've lived in Japan and Korea. I was in Vietnam for a short period of time. I can tell the difference between somebody from Cambodia and somebody from Laos and somebody from Korea and somebody from Japan. I can tell the difference because I've been there. But somebody who, I mean, can you tell the difference between somebody who's Japanese and somebody that's Chinese? Probably not. Unless you think about it. Unless you have been there and you've seen a number of people, then potentially you can. So everybody seems to look alike. So all Japanese people look the same. All Chinese people look the same. Actually, China's got so many different regions, so many different dialects, and people from different regions don't look the same, as weird as that seems. People in northern China eat wheat, is their staple crop, and in the south it's rice. And people who eat rice look different than people who eat wheat. Well, it changes their skin tone, as weird as that may seem. Anyway, not important. So, the problem is that we think that everybody looks alike. Certain variables can affect how well we take in information. Weapon focus effect. If a weapon is present when a crime is committed, we may devote more attention to it than to the facial features or other physical aspects of the person with the weapon. So we're not really looking at them, we're looking at the gun. So we don't really see them, we're focusing on the gun. We want to find out if that gun is going to point toward us. And if it points toward us, we're kind of blinded by the fact that the barrel is potentially going to spit out death. So we don't really look at their faces. The presence of a weapon can also affect the processing of auditory information. In other words, you can't hear them because you're focusing on the gun. So you don't hear what they're saying. So you don't hear right, and you're not seeing right. Your focus is on that weapon. The weapon focus effect appears to be caused by selective attention. We have limited attention capacity. Unless you're trained not to do that. And police officers, of course, are trained not to do that. Military personnel are trained not to do that. Military personnel are trained to see the entire field, to see everybody. That's what they're trained to do. They don't just focus on where the gunfire is coming from. They look at everything else. That's what they're trained to do. So if they have to knock out somebody in that building, they're seeing everything else to see if there's an ambush. See if there's people over here or people over here. They're trained to do that. But as civilians, somebody that has never been in a situation like that, your focus is on the weapon, your focus is on the danger. Just on the danger, not on potential danger someplace else. And that's known as weapon focus effect. There are 3 stages of memory: encoding, storage, and retrieval. And we're going to talk about memory right now because this has to do with eyewitness accounts. Is it almost time? It's almost. Not quite. Stimuli that are only briefly seen or heard cannot be encoded fully. The complexity of a stimulus also affects its encoding. Extreme stress usually causes the person to encode information incompletely or inaccurately. The problem is putting the information into your head, or putting it into your memory. You need to encode it. How are you going to encode it? Well, you got all this adrenaline pumping through your system because that is a dangerous situation. So this is what you have to remember. But now, how are you going to encode it? You're going to encode it as danger. And so you're not really focusing on what color the guy's eyes are, what color his hair is, what shape is his face. Everybody's got a beard these days, except me. I'm like the only non-bearded guy in like Arizona. Everybody else has a beard. Everybody on television's got a beard. Once upon a time, nobody had a beard, so we could tell what they look like, but now everybody's got a beard. Witness characteristics can affect encoding. For example, the effects of stress are felt more acutely by those higher in anxiety and neuroticism. We all differ in visual acuity and hearing ability. Different expectancies about events can influence how they are encoded. We generally have a tendency to see what we expect to see. So looking at somebody holding something with both hands, usually that is a gun. In this case, it's a hairdryer, but it could potentially have been a gun. Okay. So we see what we think we're going to see. Our brain will fill pieces in if we only see a little bit. If we look and then we duck, our brain is going to tell us, it's going to fill in that whole picture. Even though we didn't see everything, it's going to fill it in the way it thinks it should fill it in. And it may give us inaccurate information. But we assume that that's what we saw. And we'll swear by it because our brain is filling in all those pieces. The reality is, when I look at Harley, I have a blind spot. Not that she is a blind spot for me, but I have a blind spot. And my brain is filling in what I know is there. She has 2 eyes, she's wearing glasses. Okay, but there is a blind spot. And my brain is filling all that in. So I think I know what I just saw. But if she were wearing a red nose, one of those clown noses, or had painted one of her teeth green or something, I may not see that because normally you don't paint your teeth. Do you paint? No. Or wear that red nose? That, okay. Okay, I'll see you guys next time.